We are very privileged to have amongst us this afternoon Ambassador Cameron Munter, who until recently was the ambassador of the United States of America to Pakistan and was here during a very difficult time in a difficult relationship. Many things happened, including the Raymond Davis case, the Abbottabad incident, the Salalah incident, and according to the polls, both in Pakistan and in the United States, the relationship seemed to be based more on mutual suspicion than mutual trust. So you can imagine the kind of challenges that the ambassador faced in doing what every ambassador tries to do, which is to leave a relationship in better shape than in which he found it. And I think no one will differ with me when I say, Ambassador, you gave it your best shot, and you are deeply appreciated for that. Today's topic is narratives, impact of politically received wisdom. I myself am struggling to understand what this exactly means, but the ambassador has told me, take it any way you want to. As long as it covers Pakistan-US relations. We know there are narratives, we know there are discourses, we know there are talks. We're not quite sure of what they are, how they differ from each other, but they seem to be various forms of communication, individual, collective, bilateral, multilateral, within countries, between countries. And what is required is for discourses that take place to sort of reinforce each other rather than to conflict with each other. Our discourse with the United States is an amalgam of the two, with sometimes the conflictual elements predominating over the cooperative or communicative, and sometimes not. And with these words, I will now give the floor to Ambassador Munter, and then after he completes his talk, we will then have questions. And during the questions, I would request you to very briefly identify yourself and either make your comment and or question sufficiently brief so that as many people can participate as possible. Thank you for your cooperation in advance. Ambassador Munter.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here today, especially to Amina Saeed, who has been the spine, the heart, and the brains of this festival for a number of years, something that we from the American Embassy have been pleased to take part in over time and hope that we can continue in the future. We'd like to also I'm very grateful to the hosts, the Avaris, who have done such a good job of taking care of all of us, and the sponsors as well. This is the kind of event, in my opinion, that is sorely needed in Pakistan, not only for Pakistanis, but for friends of Pakistan, to have the opportunity to exchange ideas, to catch up, and to figure out where we're going a little more reflectively than perhaps I was able to during the time between 2010 and 2012, when, as ambassador, I did have to face a number of challenges. But today I'm speaking to you more as an academic. I've retired from the diplomatic service, and what I want to talk about is not policy, but perception. At a literature conference like this, I'm outclassed by many authors, people who've actually written things in the public realm, but I will try to address some of the concepts that they deal with in the political context of the relationship of the United States and Pakistan, and hope in our discussion that we have a better understanding of some of the problems, the deeper problems that we have to deal with. One of the things that I do as a teacher when I begin my courses is to force my American students to have a dose of the English writer George Orwell, to ask them to read a venerable essay from 1946 called Politics and the English Language, which, if you're not assigning it to your students, I sure hope you will, simply because it says in a way that doesn't get old that we have to be very conscious about the way we talk about things. We have to think very hard as we speak, lest we fall into habits that allow us to get sloppy, to get lazy. Specifically, Orwell talks about metaphors that are stale. An example I can think of that I know from my days in Washington, I can say this now that I'm retired, is that we speak about metaphors like low-hanging fruit. When you hear someone in Washington talk about low-hanging fruit or herding cats or other phrases like this that are very common in Washington, you know, as Orwell told us, that someone has turned off his or her mind and is simply letting the phrase roll off his or her tongue, because the person who is speaking is not taking the time to think about what the presuppositions are about which the person is talking. So when your mind is turned off, it can be very comfortable. You can say things you've said 100 times before and other people have said 100 times before, but you're not having a real hard look at that which you're describing. So what I try to tell my students is I don't want to hear the stale metaphors. I want to hear you construct arguments that are your own arguments, that you're working on yourself. Now today I want to talk not just about metaphors, but about narratives. And this will be something, many of the contours of what I'll say are things that I think you're familiar with. There is at least one, but a major one, in Pakistan. It's the narrative of American betrayal. I'm expecting you all to nod. You're all supposed to say, yes, you're right. Right? So, the American betrayal narrative is that Pakistan, from its inception, has sought to be a loyal ally of the United States, has sought to work with the United States, and the United States continually, over 63 years, maybe 64, however many, 65, all through these years, America has used Pakistan and thrown Pakistan away. And there are various metaphors for this. A tissue. America used Pakistan and throws Pakistan away. And so people will come and they will talk to the ambassador from the United States. And by they, I mean school children from Faisalabad, housewives in Islamabad, businessmen, businesswomen in Karachi have all told me the story. We counted on you, America, and you let us down. Where were you in our conflicts with India in the 1960s? Where were you when we needed you in the 1970s? Where were you after we worked together to push the Soviets out of Afghanistan, and then you left as soon as this was done, only to come back in 2001 when you needed us again? And yes, we came back to you, we did what you said, and you know what will happen? You'll do this to us again. What is descriptive for many Pakistanis, I believe, if you follow this narrative, what is descriptive becomes predictive. It's not only a question that the Americans have done this to the Pakistanis, it's a question of, it's in the DNA of the Americans. It's the way Americans are, and they're going to do it to us again. Watch out. This is difficult for two types of Pakistanis. It's difficult because those who want to be friendly to America listen to this narrative, and in their hearts they fear, my God, what if it's right? And then there are those Pakistanis who are not sympathetic to America, who say, can't you see we can't invest in these people? Now what this does in this narrative is to create an image that is, in my mind, a substitute for thought. It's lazy and it's insincere. But lest you think that I'm only going to sit here and insult Pakistan, let me insult America for a minute. Americans have their narrative about Pakistan. The American Pakistan image of Pakistan is We give them all this money, we support them, we try to help them, and what do? They deceive us. What happens? We give them enough support in the 1950s to create a new state, and then they use these arms that they have and they turn them on their neighbor. We keep saying, don't attack India, but no, they pick fights with India. Why do they do that, those terrible Pakistanis? And then they decide that they want a nuclear weapon. And we say, please don't develop a nuclear weapon. And they say, okay, we promise we won't. But they do, these terrible Pakistanis. And not only that, people like A.Q. Khan, the father of the bomb here, share the technology with other people in the world, bad people. It's a duplicitous, terrible Pakistan, full of people who we give money to, and they don't do what we say. And then we have the common enemy, the people who attack America in 9/11, the people who blow up shrines in Pakistan. And what happens? We keep saying, you've got to fight these people the way we want to fight them. And the Pakistanis say, no, we're not going to fight them the way you want to fight them. We're going to fight them the way we want to fight them. So this develops into an American narrative of Pakistani duplicity and Pakistani ingratitude. It is equally lazy and it is equally negative that we have that same problem. In other words, both in Pakistan and in the United States, we derive comfort from this idea that we think we understand the other country. And what we end up doing instead is preventing a true knowledge of the other country. The fact that both countries are never going to be entirely in harmony with one another. The fact that we will try to find those areas where we can work together. But no, we concentrate on those elements that define the otherness of the other country, and the narrative of repeated abandonment that you hear in Pakistan is matched by the repeated frustration that you hear from the American side. And every time I was speaking with people as ambassador, I would try to make this point. The constructive way to deal with each other is to try to define what you have in common, to get away from these narratives. But every interviewer, including one just last week who I talked to in Washington, said, yeah, but isn't it true? And I said, no, it's not true. If you insist on defining the relationship in this way, you're going to commit the crime of prejudging the person you're dealing with. And for the Americans, the same thing is true. You have people now who are seriously talking about containment of Pakistan. These are educated Americans who have studied Pakistan, who say, we've come to the point where we're so frustrated with these Pakistanis that what we need to do is contain them, the way we had to contain the Soviet Union. And there's that feeling that then is read by the Pakistanis as a plan to wash your hands, to try to turn away. So with these narratives that we have, we're up against a set of problems. How are we going to define what the common ground is that we have if we're so busy defining each other through these images? There is a need in both countries for a little bit of courage, for a little bit of vision, and for a sense that the other country somehow, I guess I'm getting cheers from this side here, that the other country has a set of beliefs that may not entirely coincide with what either Americans think Americans want or Pakistanis think Pakistanis want. But to get past that sense that you have to have a total agreement in order to get any agreement at all. In Pakistan, I think there is an enormous need for vision and courage. And I'm sorry to say that I don't see much of it here. And I say this as a friend of Pakistan. And if I'm critical, it's because I want better things for Pakistan and I want a better relationship for America and Pakistan. I think that the victimhood problem, which is built into the Pakistani narrative, the idea that Pakistan is almost born with the idea that it is going to be the victim of American perfidy. That victimhood is something that must be fought. It must be fought in the way that many of the courageous people at this conference have tried to fight it, to try to say, take control of your own future. One example that I like to give is the example that I mentioned last week when I spoke in Washington about assistance. The example is, in assistance, it is not a question of the Americans coming simply to help Pakistan. What is absent, or what I felt was absent during the time when I was ambassador, and I take some of the responsibility for this, was the dialogue in which we were trying to figure out how would the Pakistanis like to lead so that the Americans and other friends of Pakistan can follow. Not to say, what are the Americans, what are the other international donors going to do for Pakistan, but rather, what is our vision in energy, in education, in health, in creating jobs? What is our vision that we can see so that those people who are positively disposed towards Pakistan can follow? For our part, from the American part, in the area that we concentrate on, which is in counterterrorism, we have to, I think, spread our mind a little more, open the aperture, if you will. See, open the aperture, lazy metaphor, but I used it. We have to open our eyes to see in which ways the Pakistani effort to fight terrorism, which we should respect and with which we should work, might differ from our own approach. What are the ways in which we can work in common? And what are the ways in which it's so hard for us to work in common that we must see some divergence in our efforts? Even if we have the same goal, I would like to think the same goal is an open, stable, tolerant, and prosperous Pakistan embedded in a region that is itself open, stable, and prosperous. If the road towards that in the struggle against terrorism has differences, I hope that we can accept those differences and concentrate on those elements that we have in common, rather than blaming each other for not attacking X group or liberating X territory at the time when someone else thinks it should be done. I think in addition, in both countries, there's a sense in which the narratives that we've developed have developed among us a kind of litigiousness, a kind of sense of wanting to re-litigate the past, a sense in which we go through the history and try to score points against each other. Much as I love, and I do love the Pakistani press, make no mistake, much as I love the Pakistani press, I did find that many intelligent members of the Pakistani press tried to score points when they might have asked questions that were constructive and would have gotten to this point. Similarly, you won't find many members of the American press, much as I love the American press, who want to get beyond the image of Pakistan as a place where bullets are flying every day and where people can't even get together in a way that we have. So my point is this, and what I really want to do is turn our discussion over to you to hear from you whether you think what I'm describing to you is correct, and I hope you do, so that you can then talk to me about what do we, as citizens, as friends, potential friends of each other's countries, what can we do to try to change the way we fall into this rut? What can we do to try to work people to people, business to business, institution to institution, and government to government, to try to get out of the straitjacket that I think hampers the way we think about one another, so that at the end of the day, those elements that do unite us, the warmth and the friendliness that both countries have, the admiration for a clever business deal, the admiration and the ultimate talent and culture, that we can work on those things that we have in common, standing shoulder to shoulder against those people who wish us ill, but also working together in reality and not being lost in the images of a narrative. So that's my simple thesis, and I would love to have a conversation with you. Remember, I don't work for the US government anymore, So I reserve the right to avoid any question that you might want to throw at me. Or I can give it to Ambassador Kazi to see what he will say. But I do want to see if we can explore this question. How can we get out of stereotypes and have a healthier relationship in the future? So with that, over to you.
I want to thank you, Ambassador, for a very concise and brilliant presentation of the kind of narratives we sort of throw at each other, and as a result of which we tend to talk past each other or at each other rather than to each other. And I think it was very apt of you to quote George Orwell. George Orwell, who wrote 1984, Animal Farm, and the original introduction to Animal Farm has to this day been banned because what he talked about in that introduction was that it takes a very good and expensive education to talk the kind of nonsense about. Oh, I'm not close enough, apparently. So George Orwell, in his remarks, in his original introduction to Animal Farm, said it takes a good and expensive education to talk the kind of selective nonsense that power structures want you to talk in order to convey their side of things. So narratives are basically stories behind which do lie interests and structured interests. So when we talk about narratives coming out of Pakistan, there is the dominant narrative, the narrative of the majority, the narrative that comes out of the power structure, but then there are alternate narratives, and then there are marginalized narratives. And for Pakistan to prosper, those narratives need to come into the mainstream progressively. Otherwise, this country will only have one story, which will be based on a very narrow interpretation, an interested interpretation. So that was very, when we talk about Pakistan and America, we do have to keep in mind who's talking. Is it the power-making lot, or is it the ordinary Pakistani? I think the ordinary Pakistani and a lot of informed Pakistanis don't have a negative impression of the United States and Americans as such. Yes. They do have a negative impression of American policies, and they feel they don't have to make an intellectual effort to analyze them. They see, or they think they see and feel the impact of those policies on themselves and the region in which they exist, and then they tend to come up with certain conclusions which you may or may not agree with, but those then describe the reality in which we live. So I think you've done very well in saying that we need to question the stories that we tend to take for granted, the stories that we weave and the stories that we receive. And within that effort, we have to find, and you can only do it through due diligence, you can only do it through an effort. You cannot just read a newspaper and think you've been informed. It's almost, I.F. Stone, the great journalist, most famous quotation is, all governments lie. No government, there are no exceptions. Not Pakistan, not the United States, not Russia, not anybody else. But in order to see what are they lying about and in what degree and what the perspective is, so you have to recognize your own lies and your own half-truths and all. And I therefore want to compliment Ambassador for having spoken on a subject of great importance. That was a comment, not so much a question, and I will now ask our audience to, the gentleman in the front row.
My name is Jahangir Javed. Currently I'm working with a development project, Teach for Pakistan, as a fellow. Mr. Munter, I highly appreciate the fact that you were on the stage even before the due time. I even also respect and appreciate your good thoughts about the US-Pakistan mutual respect. But still, I want to know that even the sacrifice of more than 30,000 civilians and 3,500 soldiers in this war against terror, even this, doesn't get, the label of a trusted ally for US, for Pakistan. So where the fault lies? if it is like that, then what is the desired level of sacrifices? Thank you very much.
Would you like to take a group of questions?
No, I'll do them one at a time. I'll do them one at a time.
One at a time, okay.
It's a very important question because what the word you mentioned, which is respect, is a key that I think both countries take very seriously. And in the comments that I hear from people who are skeptical about the relationship, whether I hear it in Islamabad or Washington, it's the sense that there is a lack of respect on both sides that troubles people. So you're onto a very important subject. But if I can be mildly critical, I would say, please try to avoid falling into what I would call a sense of victimhood. That is to say, it's extraordinary the sacrifice that Pakistani security forces have made and the Pakistani people have made. And as you said, 30,000 people, that's a lot of people. The soldiers, thousands of soldiers have given their lives to fight in the common fight against the militants in the West. But Pakistan, while it is in a fight, I would hope that Pakistan will not see itself simply as the victim of American lack of gratitude, but will also make sure that it says to itself, and I hope this is the way people feel, the fact that we are fighting is, it's our fight. It's our culture, our openness that we're fighting for. We want the Americans to respect it, but we're not doing it in order to get American respect. And maybe this isn't the point you were trying to make. But it's not in order to get respect, it's because it's the right fight. I think once we sit down, and I say not only the security officers, but the people of both countries, and we're aware of what we have in common, what we're fighting for, rather than seeing it in the way that Americans say, here we spend money on all this equipment, or the Pakistanis say, look at the sacrifice we've made. The dueling set of who has given more, those kinds of questions, to me, are less important than coming to agreement on the goals that we're trying to reach together, if we can. You're right that the key to this is going to be respect and finding a common language. There are institutional reasons in both countries why we've had problems with that. We've had fights in the United States about what is the proper way to focus in this country. And Richard Holbrooke, who worked very hard on Pakistan before his death in the end of 2010, was one of the people who tried to balance that kind of threat, the terrorist threat, with the commitment in the long run for a stable Pakistan, trying to make sure we just don't concentrate on Pakistan as a place where terrorists live. Similarly in Pakistan, the question of what happens in the Fatah, the question of what happens to the soldiers, I think, as you imply, is more than just a question for people in Rawalpindi. It's a question for all Pakistanis. And I think what you're saying is, yes, this should be the case. So you are right that this is important. I just urge you not to see it, if I'm being fair to you, I urge you not to see it as looking for credit, looking for someone to give you credit for what you do, and that you're keeping score somehow, but rather to think of the goal. What are these people fighting for? Why are we fighting in common? How does that work? How can we have a conversation not about what has happened and who has suffered, but a conversation of the vision of what our common fight can bring us?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, the lady in the front row.
Oh. May I?
I think so. Someone has hijacked.
The lady in the front row.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being a gentleman there.
Mr. Munter, people like you and Richard Holbrooke, they are the
The power's gone.
Hello? Yeah. Could we not have people like you forming a sort of little...
You said the word Richard Holbrooke and all the energy left. Yeah. So,
I think,
yeah,
I mean, being a superstitious Pakistani probably... the lump But there are people like you, and people in Pakistan, or a lot of us have children, say, studying in America, or many families have people in America. So committed to understand colloquium, a forum.
Yeah.
I said the sound system is defective.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can you
but-
hear me?
Yes, let me try to repeat your question since
Yeah.
it went out. I think what you're saying is, are there people, you mentioned Richard Holbrooke, you mentioned me, but there are many others,
course.
who are the friends of Pakistan, not blind to Pakistan's faults, but the people who could perhaps get together and talk about Pakistan? And the answer is yes, of course we do.
And could you
But-
not be seeded, into institutions and business, sort
Right.
of,
I think that the point I made, true, this is necessary, but the point I made earlier about Pakistani leadership really is crucial. That is to say, what I would rather see than simply such a consortium would be the inspiration for such a consortium coming from Pakistan. That is to say, the ability that we begin to see when people come to the United States, your business leaders, your students, your cultural figures, when a Kawali tour takes place in the United States, this is the kind of face that we like to see. So what I would like to think is that we can balance the efforts of people who are friendly to Pakistan, who are hopeful for Pakistan, behind the leadership of Pakistanis. Now, I know I'm throwing this back at you, but in a long way, there is a problem that, again, this narrative has created, which is the problem I faced when I was here as ambassador, which is what we call the viceroy obsession, right? Which is nothing happens in Pakistan that the viceroy doesn't want to have happen, right? I heard many times, why were there floods in 2010? Well, you're the people who put a man on the moon. If you can put a man on the moon, nothing is going to happen that you don't want to have happen. You must have wanted these floods to come. And I'm being a little facetious, but not too much. There is a sense, and we're guilty of cultivating this as well. There's a sense that the bilateral relationship with these narratives has made us into something bigger than we actually are. We are a very powerful country. We are a very rich country, but not everything that happens in Pakistan happens because of us or without us. So I'll twist your question a little bit and say, where are the ways that we can work together in the future that might get us out of this rut? And I can think of two areas. One of them is that inasmuch as we can think of the problems that Pakistan faces and try to get them out of the question of America and Pakistan and get them into more regional contexts, I think that's a healthy move. It's not that I'm saying every question that has to do with Pakistan is by its nature an India question or a China question or an Afghanistan question or an Iran or a Turkey question. But enough of the questions that you're dealing with, energy, education, health, the kinds of questions about political openness in your country, public perceptions of the party system and corruption, as much as these can be part of a dialogue that has to do with regional development, opening up your country in the region, perhaps this will lessen the sense that people look at the United States as kind of the overarching, overwhelming presence. Because I think a healthy presence of the United States is a more honest one, where we don't claim to be the people who have all the answers, and where you don't expect us to have all the answers, but we and our British friends and our Indian friends, because they are our friends and we want them to be your friends, and our Turkish friends and our Chinese friends. There are a lot of places in the world where America and China have very common goals, and Pakistan, in my opinion, is one of them. So that's one area that we can do things together and get away from this viceroy obsession. The second is that we have a tendency, and I say this as a former government service, to think of American-Pakistani relationships as governmental relationships. What does John Kerry say to Hina Rabbani Kar? That is Pakistan talking to America, America talking to Pakistan. Well, true, these people represent us, but it's not the whole story. And the face of America and the face of Pakistan that I like the most is when we see your students in the States, when we see an American entertainer coming over here, when we see businesses that work together. That is that great world of non-governmental work where we focus on the image of one another that frankly we have that's positive and where we can build a lot of things that get out of the rut of trying to figure out what can these viceroys do. So I took it away a little bit from your question, but I think it's very, very important that we spread the vision of how we relate to each other far beyond even those people in government who I think are of goodwill.
Thank you for that very comprehensive response, Ambassador, and I hope you'll be less comprehensive in future so that more people can get to talk to you. Gentleman in the second row.
I'm Indar Ahuja. I'm human rights activist. My question is some statement and then is the question also that a decade and a half ago, there was a hope of free America to every human man, Asia and poverty-ridden countries that by following this, that give access to free movement to every human, free speech to every human, free movement and everything like in America and Europe. But after 9/11, Bush administration and think tanks America decided to make operation in Iraq and Afghanistan. I won't say it invade because there is a difference between invade and operations, because your intention was operations not invade. So what this mayors has resulted into instead of containing this within 2-3 years, it has mushroomed, and we see this freedom is in chains more in America and Europe than here. Here we can move without our check of shoes in aeroplanes, but the Europeans, Americans can't move there without checking of these. So I think there is some need in change in strategy of the think tanks and American administration. There is strategy towards deal with this problem so that we have a freedom, a free movement, free human within a decade or so, longer period, not in centuries it seems. With the present situation, I see we won't be able to get freedom even after a few centuries. What are your comments?
Thank you very much. And as you said, Ambassador, you're not the first person who said that I like to hear myself talk. My wife has said that to me on a number of occasions, and I forget too often. So I'll try to keep it short. You make a very good point. The issues that began at 9/11 had a profound impact on our ability to live up to the standards that we think are so important and the American values that we support around the world. And they've come under fire, there's no doubt. What I hope will happen is that after 2014, when the nature of the American commitment to Afghanistan does change, and the face of America in this region perhaps will be a little bit less focused on military issues in Afghanistan, that we can follow the leadership of Pakistan, we can follow the leadership of India, we can follow the leadership of the government of Afghanistan, that we see the efforts you're making to try to expand those freedoms here among yourselves, because no one can give these things to you. You have to earn them yourselves. You have to decide that you govern yourselves in certain ways, that you deal with your neighbors in certain ways. And what I'm hoping is that after 2014, there may be a different atmosphere that would allow us to support your initiatives for freedom and for human rights in the way you see fit. I think this will take Pakistani leadership, and not just Pakistani leadership, regional leadership to deal with these issues, and I hope that the rest of the world, the United States included, can be supportive.
Yes. Gentleman there at the back, who's with his hands raised.
America stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness due to democracy. And democracy, by its definition, is very volatile and turbulent. And Americans want Pakistan to develop that system. Since Pakistanis are very diverse and contentious people, what modus operandi or what practical support can you offer to Pakistan for nurturing democratic institutions in Pakistan? As far as I'm concerned, I don't see any seriousness on the part of America in nurturing democracy. It's just a facade, if I could say that. You're not serious in helping Pakistan nurture democracy.
Right. I think Pakistan has to lead. Please don't expect America to bring democracy to you. Please don't do that. I think generations of Pakistanis have made that mistake. I'm sorry. If you lead, if you show us by example that you are serious about fighting corruption, that you are serious about giving opportunity to young people, that you're serious about investing government money in education, that you're serious about a taxation system in your country that's fair. If you can make those kinds of leadership decisions, I know it's tough. You're not running the government. I can't hold you responsible, but unless you show that leadership, we can't do it for you. We came up after 2008 when your government came back to civilian rule, and people like Senator Kerry, who is incidentally a great friend of Pakistan, and you're very fortunate to have him as a Secretary of State. Senator Kerry, with Kerry Lugar Berman, however that was understood here, it was meant in the United States to be a long-term commitment to precisely the values that you talked about opening democracy and stability and prosperity to people in this country. Whether we have lived up to our values or not, I think there's a good question. And I think we deserve criticism for not doing everything that we could have, especially, I would say, in the time that I was here, in assistance. But nothing we can do is going to be a substitute for Pakistani leadership. Pakistani leadership that comes from the people, Pakistani leadership that comes from the institutions you represent, the institutions that are here, Pakistani leadership in the public sphere, in your wide open press, which I love, so that you will be making sure that you show the rest of the world that you're in charge, you're confident, you're going to make it as a democracy, and we can be part of supporting that.
Thank you for that response, Ambassador. There are, of course, many people who would allege that the United States, while subscribing to democratic values, has often in practice found itself in a position where it feels it has no option but to support non-democratic forces, including dictators, because they happen to be more cooperative with American strategic interests than in Pakistan. I won't ask you to answer to that immediately.
If I may comment, but this is not unique to Pakistan. And we always deserve the kind of criticism that we get because we have a country that is fairly unique among countries. When you're an American, you're not just representing a tribe. You're representing a set of ideals. And if you claim to represent ideals, people are always going to look at you and say, are you living up to those ideals? And we don't always live up to them. There's always a tension between what people call the reasons of state or realpolitik. And there's always the question of American interests and American values. And it's harder for us than for most countries because of our claims about values. But we do believe that in the long run, if we can make our values and our interests coincide, if we can see a democratic, prosperous Pakistan, that is vastly preferable to us, believe me, than any kind of dictatorship.
Yes, gentleman, Ghafoor Bhai, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right. Then afterwards I'll ask you.
Mr. Ambassador, let me begin by
Oh.
Okay.
No. Sad.
We'll listen. Okay.
आप आगे आप बात कर सकते हो आवाज़ नहीं आ रही
Excuse. Is it all right? Mr. Ambassador, let me congratulate you as a student of the American Foreign Service for living up to its highest traditions in serving your country with due detachment, because in my country, I'm an Indian, I have seen American ambassadors who have been more zealous than objective. Forgetting the past, there is an opportunity and a challenge, and that is Afghanistan. If America can forge a policy as well which satisfies Pakistani interests as well as the interests of the region, I think it will go a long way. In this case, let me take the liberty of making a suggestion to you as an academic. Sir, a small study group comprising exclusively of American. Speed of the essence is of the essence. Come up with policy guidelines, consult the Iranians, Russians, Chinese, and of course the Indians, but primarily it should be an American Pakistani concern. If you come up with policy guidelines which satisfy the interests of Afghanistan, stability, democracy, and Pakistan's security interests, I'm one of those Indians who felt that India shouldn't meddle in Afghanistan any more than we would like Pakistanis to meddle in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. And I would only say that what we hope to see, the theme that I've mentioned to you various times today, is we do hope to see the kind of initiatives coming from the region. Because ultimately, we don't live here. You do. And what I would love to see is exactly, those of you who may have missed because of the sound system, he was suggesting a group of experts, Pakistanis and Americans, to come up with policy guidelines for the future of Afghanistan. Well, I think of Afghanistan's neighbors, and I think, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if the military leadership of India and the military leadership of Pakistan could talk to one another and ask each other, what do you think about the future of Afghanistan? To my knowledge, there's not a lot of that going on. But that kind of dialogue it never hurts. It's never wrong for Indian military leaders and Pakistani military leaders to talk to one another. We'd like to be part of that process. We hope, as I think you hope, that it'll be regional, because the only solution for Afghanistan is for all of its neighbors to try to play a constructive role. But I certainly hope that it's not just something that's seen as an American task. I hope it's something that's seen as a task of the people here who have to live and to guarantee what's going to happen after 2014.
Now we're going to have the last two questions. One is from the lady in the front row, and one I'll read out, which has just been handed out to me, and maybe you can, you take the two at one time because of the lack of time. The first one is regarding Pakistan's geological importance. How does the US see Pakistan's geological importance, and how does the US react to it?
I think you mean geopolitical, not geological.
Geopolitical.
Because if it's geological, there's things about oil that I don't understand.
Geological is a Freudian slip, but probably true too. Geopolitical. And would you, and your question too.
Okay. My question is that we keep hearing the catchphrase, do more. Okay, now what is owed to Pakistan is 100 billion and owed 18 billion paid. Why don't you pay us more? And it may not even sound like gratitude, it's money owed. That would be fair.
Yeah.
I think that's
I think what you've said is just ridiculous. Come on.
It's today's statistic.
Come on. You have to be serious.
Statistics. No, it is today's statistic.
Are you simply expecting us to come and tell you, here is a bunch of money? You're fitting into the American, this is what makes the Americans have their narrative.
It's what has been spent. It's what's been spent on the war.
You're fighting the war for us, not for you? Aren't you defending your own country, your own values? For God's sake.
But to be fair to the lady, it is controversial within Pakistan whether the war on terror, such as it is in Pakistan's interest, or should Pakistan be fighting its own war on terror, not linked to the American strategic war on terror in the region and particularly in the neighborhood, which delegitimates Pakistan's war on terror.
I think the good news is you're going to get a chance to do this. In 2014, when the Americans reorient the way that they approach Afghanistan, you will have a choice. You can stand up using your own efforts to try to defend the culture that so many of us respect here, the openness, the tolerance, the Pakistan we all love, or you can expect someone else to do it for you. Your choice. I hope you do the right thing, and I think if you do the right thing, you'll have us backing you. That's that question. On the geopolitical question in the region, you know, I guess I never was a very good diplomat. I could never quite figure out what that meant, geopolitical. I never could quite figure out how people balance places without the people who live in them. And I know this may sound like I'm avoiding the question, but I don't think of Pakistan as a thing. And I don't think of Afghanistan as a thing, or India as a thing. I certainly found, and I think those people who are the friends of Pakistan find it, it's the Pakistani people. It's all of you who are the people who we respect and admire and want to see be successful. If we reduce you simply to an entity, Pakistan, it loses the richness, the diversity of your country that is really, I think, one of your strengths. So I know I'm avoiding the question because I have to confess, I don't really think I understand it. What is the geopolitical importance of Pakistan? But I'll tell you, Pakistanis are the kind of friends and the kind of people that most Americans who know Pakistanis really respect. I hope that in the future we can open up the gates to the people-to-people contact so that that link between our countries gets stronger and stronger, and the question of being used in geopolitical balance becomes perhaps a little less prevalent. Maybe one last before we go?
No, I think it just remains for me to thank you, Ambassador, for your talk and for your response to the questions. And I think what you have proved here, that you can be both a distinguished and patriotic American and a sincere friend of Pakistan. And that's what you've proven today. And we are very, very much in your debt for this wonderful presentation and for this event. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.